Rarely in the history of Latin American entertainment have so much talent, charisma, and legacy come together as in the universe created by Roberto Gómez Bolaños. His creative genius not only brought to life beloved characters like El Chavo, El Chapulín Colorado, or Dr. Chapatin, but also propelled great actors who left an indelible mark on entire generations. In this special, we bring together 3 great stories that touched millions of people, the life and work of Roberto Gómez Bolaños. The unforgettable Don Ramon, played by the charismatic Ramón Valdés, and the always gallant Professor Girafales, portrayed by Rubén Aguirre. 3 figures who, beyond the screen, experience moments of success, conflicts, and also deep friendships. All of this is because the biographical series Chespirito has just premiered. A production that promises to show us the most human side of the creator, revealing little-known aspects of his life and his impact on world television. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia, laughter, and excitement. This is the ultimate special about the universe of Chespirito. If you're interested, we can make another video about the Chespirito universe, with characters like, for example, the Witch of 71, which we haven't done yet, or Godinez or someone else. If you think of someone, write their name below in the comments. And if there are more than 1,000 people asking for that character, we'll make a report about it. Now let's get started. He is considered one of the icons of Spanish-speaking entertainment, and his fame has spread all over the world, where he is known for creating a children's character that some have called the Mickey Mouse of Mexico. He is fondly remembered by his fans, and there are several generations who, after 50 years of uninterrupted broadcasting, grew up enjoying the products of his fertile and multifaceted imagination. He was an actor and comedian, but above all, a writer whose material to this day remains timeless. As a good strategist, she knew how to make the most out of her weaknesses. And from his short stature, which many mocked in his youth, he turned it into part of his trademark. At some point in the 70s, someone suggested that children's shows no longer sold. He came to prove that nothing could be further from the truth and left speechless anyone who underestimated his cleverness. Today we're going to learn about his first projects, the controversies that surrounded his career, his story involving drug trafficking, and his constant reinvention. And our journey will end on November 28, 2014, the day Chespirito died. With 85 years. His health problems had led him on more than one occasion to have to come out and deny rumors of his death. Once, he had written to his more than 5 million followers on Twitter, "I didn't die, I confirm it every morning, and today I woke up again." I'd even say handsome. While many people celebrated his joke, highlighting his ability to keep being witty in his comments. In the same way, they noticed that the man behind the keyboard was a bit more hurt than he let on. In his last interviews, they had seen him a bit slow, quite hard of hearing, worn down by the years, but still lively, sharing that fire and sharpness that had always characterized him. When he never got tired of getting off planes in different countries, where he was welcomed like a real star. Places where both adults and children would rush toward him and his team. Countries where he had shown his humility in every interview he had participated in. He spent his last days resting in his mansion, which was located in Isla Dorada in Cancun. Diabetes and the onset of Parkinson's disease prevented him, when things got worse, from going out for walks on the pier, one of his favorite activities. And that's not even mentioning another of his problems, a pulmonary emphysema caused by one of his greatest enemies, one that his famous little vinyl antennas failed to warn him about: cigarettes. So he was no longer able to go see those beautiful sunsets up close. However, he kept drawing them. Yes, because besides being a great playwright, screenwriter, composer, director, and producer, he was also very good at drawing. The building where he spent his time was called Villa Florinda, in honor of the woman he considered his great love. The architecture of the place, which is now for sale, is in a classic Hispanic Mexican style. It has 7 bedrooms and 7 full bathrooms in its 1,060 square meters of construction. A place, without a doubt, much more spacious than that barrel where he used to hide during his golden days as an actor. However, the man made little use of so many rooms. He was always thoughtful, restless in his reflections, lost, perhaps in projects he would never complete anymore. His imagination was unstoppable. As we already mentioned, he kept in touch with his fans thanks to social media. Fans who were left completely in disbelief when Florinda Mesa wrote on November 28, 2014. This time it's not a rumor, a fabrication, or a joke. My husband, Roberto Gómez Bolaños, has died. That Friday, at 2:30 in the afternoon, the Mexican artist stopped breathing due to respiratory failure linked to heart failure. The man, paradoxically, would leave a heart eternalized in the hearts of all viewers, more precisely a yellow heart with the letters C and H in the middle. Chespirito was dead, yes, but at that very moment, all his characters showed that they didn't need their creator to stay alive. At that moment, his characters became as real as he was, and he became just another character. Every character has a story, and all stories begin more or less in childhood. Before it became difficult, Chespirito's childhood almost wasn't. And the thing is, his mother, while she was pregnant with him, took a medication that was supposed to cure her flu. And she ended up putting both the little one and her own life at risk. Her doctor, after the delicate situation, recommended an abortion, but she refused. So, on February 21st, 1929, she gave birth to a boy whom she named Roberto Gómez Bolaños. His father was a talented illustrator, fond of painting, theater, and music. A man who surely would have been proud of what Roberto would become, if only he had had the chance to see him grow up. The man passed away after dealing with a stroke when the little boy was only 6 years old. Apart from the emotional blow that this meant, the family went into a severe financial crisis. For that reason, Roberto approached a circus that was in front of his house to help out with the shows and raise money. There he had his first encounter with a profession that would make him a millionaire in the not-so-distant future. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The thing is, misfortune kept following little Roberto, and at the age of 10 he had to leave school and his friends for a whole year because of an emergency rabies treatment, as a result of a dog bite. The dog never came back remorseful. But he used all that time to read and read, unintentionally shaping his destiny. When he grew up, he would popularize the phrase, "Revenge is never good, it kills the soul and poisons it." If he had applied that phrase to his childhood, we could say he spent it poisoning himself without scruples. And when he returned to school, he discovered something terrible. All his classmates had had a growth spurt, something that hadn't happened to him. They quickly started making fun of his height, and how did he react? Well, let's just say it wasn't in the best way. He started punching everyone who was insolent, and with his bare fists he managed to make up for the inches he lacked. He even practiced boxing, a discipline in which he actually competed, developing new and varied physical skills. He even managed to win medals and decorations, something his mother never celebrated for him. Anyway, the young man quickly got bored of the gloves. Sometime later, he wanted to try his hand at the world of soccer, but it didn't work out. He also tried his luck at university, studying engineering, but he had to drop out in his second year because he needed a job. He still felt a bit lost, not realizing that his potential was in what he did most naturally. Roberto wrote the songs for the summer camp festivals and read story excerpts to his closest friends. Things he did as a hobby, things he was really good at. When he saw an ad in a newspaper, all his alarms went off. An advertising agency needed apprentices to work in radio and television. The entertainment industry didn't suspect from the beginning that its story was about to change forever. Roberto showed up for the call and almost fell into despair. He found a long line. They were all aspiring producers. He thought he didn't have as much experience as the others and was about to leave. But then he noticed a small yet significant detail that would change his life and the lives of millions of people. On one side, there was another line of applicants, a much shorter line. It was the line for those who wanted to apply as writers. Roberto then, impulsive and brave, joined this line and entrusted himself to the best of luck. A unique and unprecedented career, it was beginning at that very moment. Roberto obviously was selected. He started by editing some commercials, then moved on to scripts for radio. Sooner rather than later, he was already writing monologues for well-known comedians, and it wasn't long before he had his first flirtations with television. That's how, through perseverance, he filled page after page with his ideas. Gradually making a place for himself, but in a consistent way, creating a particular style and striving to improve himself, work by work. Doors started to open for him, and we're not talking about just a few doors. His emotional, intelligent, and suggestive lines would lead him to experience a dizzying career and a life full of success. It was immediately clear that on his path to fame there would be no limits. In 1948, he was already writing for Viruta and Capulina, two well-known Mexican comedians. Suddenly, he started to become more recognized and his salary improved, along with new contract offers. By that time, Roberto had already married the Argentine Graciela Fernandez. Taking advantage of the good streak, he moved and built a family with 6 children. Things were really going better for him than he had expected, and he was thinking about his new scripts. One day, he arrived early on the set of Viruta and Capulina, and they told him that one of the actors was absent. The members of the technical crew then asked Roberto if he would be willing to do a small role in the short film. Did Roberto feel afraid at that moment? Most likely. But, as he would later explain in some interviews, for him, feeling fear was a vital requirement for any hero.
What do heroes like Superman and He-Man think?
They're not heroes. Heroes made by the colorless one? And is this serious? Heroism doesn't mean being without fear, but overcoming it. Those guys aren't afraid, Batman, Superman. They're all powerful. They can't be afraid. El Chapo in Colorado is scared to death. He's clumsy, weak, dumb, and so on. And aware of those shortcomings, he faces the problem. That's a hero, and he loses. Another characteristic of heroes. Heroes lose many times. Later, his ideas triumph, but in the meantime, the hero. How many people executed by firing squad do we know?
He felt a bit of shyness, of course, but he overcame it. He closed his eyes, sighed, and took the big leap. When he was given the order to act, everyone was amazed. Thanks to his athletic background, Roberto moved gracefully, did some flips, and made it very clear that he felt like a fish in water. More precisely, Roberto seemed like a little Shakespeare to him. The Mexican then laughed at this compliment and with a small adjustment turned it into his stage name. A name that would accompany him from that moment until his death. Chespirito would end up being the name of a powerful business group. At that time, Chespirito succeeded in the film industry with movies he wrote himself. Los Legionarios, Angelitos del Trapecio, Dos Locos en Escena, Dos Criados Malcriados, Limosneros por Garrote, Dos Meseros Majaderos, and La Guerra de los Pasteles are just a few examples. Since everything he touched turned into a source of income, Roberto became the studio's spoiled child, just what he needed to deliver his finishing blow. During the year 1968, Chespirito resigned from his job as a writer, meaning he stopped writing for others. From that moment on, with 15 prolific years behind him, he faced his most honest ambitions head-on. And what was it that he wanted? He wanted to do something huge, something that would revolutionize comedy. He wanted to write for himself. While he was searching for the formula for laughter, his mother was dying of a sudden pancreatic cancer, which, far from discouraging him, made him realize that his moment was right then. He couldn't keep waiting. Maybe he didn't even know it consciously, but in his mind, the bricks started to pile up. Little by little, he was building his own world. More precisely, his own neighborhood. His first comedy series was called El Ciudadano Gómez, and he wrote it after being invited to collaborate with the famous Channel 8. In 1969, he was offered a spot on the show Sábados de la Fortuna. A few minutes that Chespirito managed to turn into a whole show. This is how Los Supergenios de la Mesa Cuadrada arrived, where the characters read supposed letters sent by the audience and answered them with jokes and references to current events. With his value as a scriptwriter on the rise, Chespirito brought to life one of the characters that would catapult him. We're talking specifically about a superhero who has nothing to envy from the characters of Detective Comics and Marvel. From Mexico and for the whole universe came the great Chavo in Colorado. And that was just the beginning, because later on, under pressure, he presented the act of a poor boy who had a problem with a balloon vendor in the park. It was the year 1971. The balloon vendor was played by Ramon Valdez, and the boy was played by him. This character also greeted the audience and soon had his own sketch. And since they were on Channel 8 at that time, the boy was named El Chavo del Ocho. The rest is history. The cast of El Chavo del Ocho was completed by María Antonieta de las Nieves, Rubén Aguirre, Ramón Valdés, Carlos Villagrán, Edgar Vivar, Ángel Inés Fernández, and Florinda Mesa. Actors who, thanks to those roles, would achieve fame and popularity in many countries. The show had a huge impact in Mexico and Latin America. In 1972, El Chavo was the most successful show on Channel 8. In 1973, Telesistema Mexicano and Televisión Independiente de México merged to create Televisa. Then, the show began airing on Channel 2. According to the newspaper Excelsior, in 1975, the series was watched by more than 350 million viewers every week and reached up to 55 and 60 rating points. The main cast began touring other countries starting in 1977, where they performed and danced in front of audiences, breaking more and more records. Just as he had previously focused on his own childhood, now he did so with a group of characters. Chespirito began studying his daughters by copying behaviors and creating well-defined and universal personalities, which served as a springboard for him to address basic conflicts, but ones full of nuances that put the viewer's emotions in check. Laughter always gave way to sentimentality, and his creations were never lacking in allusions and criticisms of modern society. Over time, and with some changes in paradigm, the show would be criticized for showing violence toward children, who, let's remember, were played by adults. However, at that time, it kept receiving praise after praise. And what could go wrong? Obviously nothing. Well, actually, you already know the saying, small town, big hell. And given how things turned out, we can say that this saying can also be applied to neighborhoods. The constant trips kept Chespirito away from his family, and he began a romance with Florinda Mesa. At first, they kept it discreet, but when the story came to light, the woman was attacked by all the media, who didn't hesitate to label her as an opportunist. Florinda and Chespirito became a strong work team, and their earnings kept growing. Televisa wanted to take advantage of such popularity to release a movie about El Chavo del Ocho, but Chespirito raised the stakes and suggested they do something different. That's how El Chanfre was born, where the same actors from the acclaimed series played out a story related to another of Chespirito's passions, soccer. The success was instant, and they asked him to make a sequel, which he proudly accepted. Meanwhile, the nice neighborhood was filling up more and more with dark rumors, mistrust, and resentments. Fights from the fiction became real, and actors who seemed to get along wonderfully on screen ignored each other day after day. In 1978, Villagrán left the show's cast to start his own show with the character of Kiko. This would lead to an odyssey in which he would end up suing Chespirito, claiming that Kiko actually belonged to him. Despite the harsh clashes with the creator of the series, Villagrán filmed his last episodes with his colleagues in 1978, with apparent normality. Once he left El Chavo del Ocho, Villagrán would continue using the character in tours and projects. In 1981, Valdez also left for good, after having taken some breaks, and the following year he starred in the series Federico with Villagrán. 6 years later, in 1988, he would work with him again in A.K. Kiko. In August of that year, he would pass away, shattering the dreams of those who wanted to see him play the tempestuous and lazy Don Ramon again. When Chespirito did not attend his funeral, the rest of the team was upset. And many claim that at that time, Florinda Mesa, who they accused of not only wanting money, was being a bad influence on the great comedian. Once again, Florinda Mesa was considered a great witch, and everything negative the public saw in Chespirito was attributed to her. No one seemed to have any patience with her. The last half-hour episode of El Chavo del Ocho as a series aired on January 7, 1980, while the final sketch appeared more than a decade later, on June 12, 1992, as part of Chespirito once again, which began production immediately after the end of El Chavo del Ocho. Chespirito confessed in 2008 that at one point he conceived the end of the show with an episode where El Chavo died. Run over by a car, one of his daughters warned him that this idea would have a negative impact on the child audience. Characters continued to be part of everyday life. But let's go back to 1992. What happened to Chespirito now that he was no longer in El Chavo? Was he left forgotten? No, obviously not at all. A bit tired of the screen, Chespirito went back to writing, but this time for theater. He created the play Once y Doce, and you know what? He kept proving that his pen still had a lot to say. Once y Doce was originally staged in Mexico, but it was successfully performed in several South American countries such as Peru and Colombia. Although it was a play that started with very little audience, word of mouth did its job, and when they were about to cancel it, the full theaters kept coming one after another. The play ended up offering 6 performances a week and would become the longest running play in Mexico. A record it still holds to this day. In Chile, the cast performed twice at the National Stadium, for a total audience of approximately 160,000 spectators. But, besides success, there were also some rumors in Chespirito's life that linked him to the world of drug trafficking and also talked about his involvement in politics. At the time, there was a big commotion when the son of the boss of the Cali cartel in Colombia stated that once, Chespirito had performed at a private party organized for one of the sons of those who ran this mafia. Chespirito immediately responded by saying that all of that was a vile slander. Of course, everyone believed him. However, in 1995, a video excerpt came to light showing the Mexican, along with his cast, performing at the private party of a businessman who is currently detained for drug trafficking. This footage was revealed by the news program Krypton, which aired on weekends on the now-defunct Channel 2 of Colombia. Chespirito obviously pretended not to know anything. Had they taken advantage of his kindness? Later, in 2000 and 2006, Chespirito was once again criticized for appearing in television ads supporting the electoral campaigns of the National Action Party. I'm Chespirito, I love
Mexico dearly, and I want to see it united. Men, women, elderly, young people, rich, poor, we all have the same value.
But united,
We are worth more. My vote is for Partido Acción Nacional deputies and senators. Think about it. Vote all the way for Partido Acción Nacional.
in April of 2007. He joined the demands of Catholic and conservative groups who fought to keep abortion as a crime in Mexico City, even participating in propaganda against the law.
When I was in my mother's womb, she had an accident that almost killed her. The doctor told her, "You'll have to abort," and she replied, "Abort? Never." That is, she defended life, my life.
And thanks to that, I'm here. Few people knew that the famous comedian had politics in his blood, since he was related to former President Gustavo Díaz Ordaz Bolaño. Gómez Bolaños' mother was a cousin of the former president, who was also known for being in charge on the day of the student massacre in Tlatelolco, Mexico City, in 1968. Beyond everything, his legacy remained in the arts, and he received multiple tributes, many of them during his lifetime. On March 29, 2012, a tribute was paid to Chespirito at the National Auditorium. It was broadcast simultaneously in more than 17 countries. 2 years later, the creator of one of the most successful shows in the history of Latin American television left for good. After his death, the comedian's remains were transported in a hearse from his mansion to the Cancun International Airport on a private flight. He traveled to Televisa San Angel, where he was also given a final tribute as a comedy icon. On Sunday, November 30th, 2014, the remains of Chespirito were taken in a funeral procession to the Azteca Stadium in Mexico, while on the way, his fans gave him a final farewell. In life, he had asked to be followed by good people, and those who grew up with him followed him, without hesitation and with loyalty. The remains of Roberto Gómez Bolaños now rest in the Panteón Francés de la Piedad Cemetery, where he was buried in a private ceremony, December 1st, 2014. His children and his widow, Florinda Mesa, are in a constant battle over his inheritance. And it turns out that Chavo, despite being born poor, left behind a huge fortune. In 1974, Chavo del Ocho was awarded the Heraldo de Mexico by the newspaper of the same name as the best comedy show on Mexican television. The characters from the timeless franchise have also taken the form of collectible figures, puppets, plush dolls, and board games. El Chavo del Ocho continues to renew itself and has also entered the digital world with its own app, which allows users to dress like him, play with the characters, and even ask him questions. It also has video games like El Chavo Kart for the Wii console. In 2006, an animated version of this series was released, and in 2016 it was available on Google. It was awarded a gold button for being the first Mexican television show to reach 1 million subscribers on YouTube. Chespirito used to give his most iconic characters names that started with C and H. Besides that, he took part in soap operas, soundtracks, and even claimed that scripts he wrote were plagiarized in Hollywood. He published books, gave lectures, and was committed to his creations until the very end. Due to economic and legal problems between Grupo Chespirito and Televisa, all broadcasts of his shows have been stopped on free-to-air television in Mexico and more than 20 countries. July 31, 2020 was the last day of uninterrupted broadcasting of his shows. We are living through an important historical moment. After a long time, for the first time, there is no Chespirito on television. The big question is then, who can defend himself with his character now, if not practically his entire essence? Many say that he didn't have to try too hard or act too much when he played the character of Don Ramon, because that's how he was in real life. That's why today we're going to learn about all his great milestones, we're going to take a deep look at his career, and we're going to pause. August 9th, 1988, the day he died. Ramón Valdés. Ramón Antonio Esteban Gómez de Valdés y Castillo, known simply as Ramón Valdés, was a Mexican actor and comedian. He was born on September 2nd, 1923 in Mexico City. He was the son of Rafael Gómez and Guadalupe Castillo. Among his siblings, humor and acting were a common denominator. Germán Valdés, Tintán, Manuel el Loco Valdés, and Antonio el Ratón Valdés were a great example of this. When Ramón Valdés was 2 years old, they moved to the capital, Juárez, in Chihuahua, where his older brothers paved the artistic path. Thanks to his brother Tintán, Ramón was able to enter the world of movies. That's why it's a bit unfair that maybe most people simply know him for his role in the neighborhood of El Chavo. Because this great actor did it and was part of a lot of films that stayed in the memory of all Mexicans.
The piece is over now. You already know we will be the godparents. And let's see if you're not talking bad about Quintan, you fool. I used to talk, but I won't talk again, I assure you. Congratulations, Chipillo, thank you.
You, Piston. I already had my eye on her, man, but you took her from me. Oh, well. Who did I have my eye on? On Lupita, don't play dumb. Look, which Lupita? Which one?
She was a true icon of what is known as the golden age of Mexican cinema. Between 1949, the year of her debut on the big screen, and 1985, Monchito, as they called him when he was a boy, he worked in movies such as Calabacitas Tiernas, Escuela de Vagabundos, Entrega Inmediata, El Cuerpazo del Delito, and El Chanfle. A film directed by Enrique Segoviano and written by Chespirito himself. And speaking a bit about the boss, it was in 1970 when this screenwriter and comedian took notice of Ramón Valdés and invited him to be part of a sketch called The Super Geniuses of the Square Table. His role was engineer Ramón Valdés. That television debut would be the crowning achievement of an impeccable career. A year later, the role that would change his life was created, Don Ramón. And create is simply a way of saying it. Because Chespirito, when telling him how to play Chilindrina's father, simply told him to be yourself. This part of Ramon Valdez's story is probably very familiar to you. His various jobs in the neighborhood, the problems with Chilindrina, the hits from Chavo, and a huge number of situations that enhanced the character, among them, his fights with Kiko and above all with Doña Florita. His work on television had allowed him to forget about debts and all the expenses for a while. Until in 1979, surprisingly, he decided to resign. Villagrán and Valdez were great friends, and just like in many episodes, they would finally come together in a unique punchline. In real life. When Carlos Villagrán decided to leave the Chavo show to continue his career, Don Ramon followed him. Unlike other actors, Ramon Valdez never had problems with Chespirito. Just like in the show, the problem was with Doña Florinda, Kiko's mother. At this point, Florinda Mesa, who was already Gómez Bolaños' wife, was in charge of the artistic direction of the show. This was not well received by most of the cast. Carlos Villagrán's departure was directly linked to Chespirito's jealousy, because apparently this spoiled child character was becoming more famous than Chavo himself. Ramon Valdez thought it was an unfair situation, so he decided to go with him, even though that meant leaving behind a juicy salary. However, Ramon Valdez decided to return to the show in 1981, the last year of the Chespirito television series. What really caught people's attention was that in the scene, his return was filmed in the neighborhood, and it showed how almost all the characters, except for Doña Florinda, were happy about it. It is still unknown if La Chilindrina knew that her father was going to appear in the story that day, because she was stunned and very excited when she saw him. And if you stop for a minute to watch this particular video, you'll notice that her reaction is completely genuine. In 1982, with Carlos Villagrán already on his own, Ramon Valdez joined him and starred in the Venezuelan show Federico, which only had 2 seasons with 29 episodes.
What are those punishments?
Well, Mr. Moncho, tomorrow they're taking Federico to the dentist to have a tooth pulled, okay?
And that's why he's crying?
That's all because they're gonna stick a needle this big between his tooth and his gum to numb him.
And if the anesthesia doesn't work, they'll use an even bigger one.
And then they're going to have to use a big wrestling wrench like this to open his mouth wide and pull out the tooth, even if he doesn't want them to.
He meanwhile continued his acting career. He even shared scenes with a young Luis Miguel.
No, nor not.
You're always sleeping through it, little singer.
You should be ready by now. And even, something not many people know, he also performed with the Divo of Mexico Juan Gabriel. If you want to know the full story of this great singer, I invite you to watch the video uploaded to this channel called The Day Juan Gabriel Died. Years later, in 1987, he returned to Aztec Television with A.K. Kiko alongside Villagrán, who did not have the rights to Kiko. And that's why he changed his name using 2 Ks instead of a Q and a C. This television venture didn't work out. Something that stands out is that in this show called Ake Kiko, it was where Don Ramon filmed his death. This scene in particular is from an episode where he was challenged to enter a cemetery. In that scene, Ramon Valdez approached a mausoleum through artificial fog created by a smoke machine. We see him enter the place and then he disappears into the shadows. Later, his actual death would occur and the coincidence would chill everyone to the bone. Later on, Villagrán, at the same wake, would shed a bit more light on the matter and recall the last thing Ramon Valdez said to him, while he was still alive, already ill and just days away from dying. "Am I going to be waiting for you, chubby, in heaven?" he asked. Este and Ramon smiled at him and said, "No, down there, don't pretend." That would be Villagrán y Valdez's last conversation, tinged with fatality and humor. We can say that in his own way, Don Ramon ended up being a true second father to Kiko. And as for what ended up happening with Doña Florinda, well, that's another story. The actress Florinda Mesa did not attend the funeral, and this really didn't surprise anyone. Even when Ramon passed away. In an interview, she stated that this actor was addicted to drugs, something that was later denied by everyone. Ramon Valdez's last tour took place in Peru. The actor worked with his circus entertaining children, who felt attached to him. When the actor was in Peru, he felt his illness getting worse, which would force him to return from his work with his circus and the comedy show, which Kiko's projects would be left unfinished because of this illness. All of this happened in 1987 and early 1988. Sometime later, his family shared several memories with the fans who were still mourning him. One of his grandchildren posted a photo on social media that had been taken a few days before his death. In the picture, Ramon appears with some family members. Although he was always a thin man, there he looked gaunt but smiling with a thumbs up. In the early 1980s, he was diagnosed with stomach cancer as a result of his strong addiction to tobacco. He underwent surgery for it, and the doctors had given him a very clear verdict. Either he quit smoking or things were going to get much worse. After his time in the operating room, the situation got worse. The tumor ended up spreading, affecting his spine. The prognosis was cruel. He had 6 months left to live. He, however, didn't give up, nor did he stop smoking. Those last 6 months turned into 4 years, and during those 4 years he continued working rigorously with the character that had made him immortal. It was confirmed that Ramon Valdez worked until his last moment, but little by little the pain became unbearable. That was how he left his tour and returned to Mexico to die where he had been born. One last memory he left for his family happened a little before he said goodbye. Ramon had made a promise. He wasn't religious, but his loyalty to Catholicism led him to believe in the resurrection. He was convinced that once he died, he would be reunited with his children, and one of them commented. One day at the clinic, he woke up and said, "We haven't agreed on where we're going to meet." His uncle Manuel was there, who had brought him several fruits. Ramon grabbed a peach, brought it close to his nose and said, "This is how the little tree where we're going to meet will smell." And that's how he left, with his heart full of hope. His body couldn't take it anymore, and after 2 weeks of staying still to avoid the pain, he finally passed away on August 9th, 1988, at the age of 64. Valdez's wake was held at the Galloso Funeral Home on Sullivan, and he was buried at the Mausoleos del Ángel Cemetery in Mexico City. The ceremony was simple, and although it was crowded, there was no pomp because that's how Ramon wanted it. The neighbors from El Chavo who offered their condolences were Carlos Villagran, Edgar Vivar, Ruben Aguirre, who played Professor Girafales, Horacio Gómez Godínez, and Angelines Fernández, who played Doña Clotilde. María Antonieta de las Nieves, who played La Chilindrina, was one of the most affected. And she deeply regretted not being with him in his final moments, since she was with her circus in Peru. Something truly moving happened at Ramon Valdez's wake. Family and close friends were present, including the cast members of El Chavo. The actress who played the Witch of 71, Angelina Fernández, spent 2 hours mourning his passing next to the coffin. She cried inconsolably, saying, "My Roro, my Roro!" They had maintained a very strong friendship. Without a doubt, they cared for each other a lot, and that anguish was shown at his funeral. After his passing, nothing was ever the same again. Chespirito, for his part, didn't attend the funeral either, since at that time he was outside of Mexico, as he mentioned in an interview. But there were also other rumors about it. Chespirito was known for being strict with his scripts. No one could go off the lines. However, he allowed Don Ramon to improvise from the very beginning. And that's how many of the character's iconic phrases came about spontaneously. It is said that when Ramon Valdez left the show, he did so because he didn't want to cause disputes for Chespirito. He had given him a great opportunity, and that's why, despite their differences, he didn't want to betray their friendship. Ramon Valdez always spoke very highly of Roberto Gómez Bolaños, and for his part, Chespirito never stopped saying that during the long days of filming that series, only Ramon could make him laugh and help him cope with the stress. The big question then is, why wasn't Gómez Bolaños really present at Ramon Valdez's funeral? The official statement, so to speak, has to do with his assistants, who claimed that they were on a tour with unbreakable commitments. Others say that Florinda Mesa did her part so that El Chavo couldn't say a final goodbye to that friend. Sometime later, a heartbroken Chespirito said in repeated interviews that he deeply regretted not being there that day. Without a doubt, there were many things left unresolved, but one that remains to this day is his debt to Señor Barriga. Señor Barriga was the owner of the properties in the nice neighborhood, and above all, the one in charge of collecting the rent. Those moments often became uncomfortable with Don Ramon always trying to escape. Just like in fiction, Kiko used to fight with him and later became one of his best friends in real life. They were also very close with Edgar Vivar. Ramon even dedicated a few words to him before passing away. Already weak, he looked at him intently and told him that he still didn't have the money to pay what he owed him, making the other burst into laughter that later turned into tears. And what if we take this particular fact into account? On the 30th anniversary of Ramon's passing, a real estate company in Mexico took the trouble to calculate the amount he left unpaid. Don Ramon. The calculation of the debt was done in a rigorous way. First, the number of square meters of the house was taken into account. Then, the area where the neighborhood was supposedly located was stipulated, which would be near the Zócalo in Mexico City. With this information, an estimated amount of what that rent would have cost in the 70s was calculated. That being the case, the 14 months of rent that Mr. Barriga was demanding from Don Ramon would have amounted to the sum of $882, not including late interest. However, considering that the character of Ramon Valdez appeared in 8 seasons of the show, the calculation was made for 110 months that he would have spent hiding from his creditor. And they came up with an amount that nowadays would be a bit difficult to pay. Years after his death, his grandnephew Miguel made a documentary called Excuse Me, Monchito about the life of Don Ramon. The main idea was to make a book with his family members. They wanted to write about the actor's life from different points of view, and that text was going to include a digital versatile disc with interviews from his 3 dearest colleagues, Edgar Vivar, Maria Antonieta de las Nieves, and Carlos Villagrán. Since the material was considered very good, they decided to upload it to YouTube. The nephew stated in an interview, "While doing this work, I found out about many things I had no idea about and never imagined. Miles. I gradually found out, and so did the public. For example, I had no idea he was so paternal and affectionate. It's a side of my grandfather that I would have liked to experience, and thanks to what people tell me today, I can know about it." The young man, something very important, never lost his sense of humor. Unfortunately, his life was marked by smoke and vices, both in front of and behind the cameras. He was an actor who won over his audience with his simplicity and by showing that everyone had a counterpart on the screen. He left behind millions of smiles and good moments which some of us can relive thanks to the shows. But there was also another Ramon Valdez, a Ramon Valdez who was a father, neighbor, friend, actor, and singer. Why did Rubén Aguirre stop being a bullfighter to dedicate himself to acting? If he was so successful and well known, why did he end up bankrupt? Is it true that he was the one who discovered Gómez Bolaños and brought him to Televisa? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this report, about that and many other things. Rubén Aguirre was not only an actor, he also showed his skills as a novice bullfighter, bullfighting commentator, radio and television announcer, reporter and writer. As if that weren't enough, he also left his mark on the big screen, appearing in movies like El Chanfle. But if there was something that characterized him, it was his portrayal of Professor Chirafales, a role that made him world famous. He was one of the iconic characters from the famous neighborhood in El Chavo del Ocho, this tall man who happened to have an air of superiority among the other characters. He was not only a romantic, but also a strict professional in the classroom. Rubén Aguirre managed to win the affection of the audience and his role lasted throughout the 7 years of the Mexican comedy. However, everything that seemed to be leading to a peaceful retirement with his family changed drastically when an accident took away the peace he had earned during his golden years. As a result of this, his finances were affected. In a single moment, he went from being safe and sound to suffering because of his health condition. The path, which seemed smooth and without obstacles, suddenly came to a halt. June 17, 2016, the day Ruben Aguirre died. Nowadays, a large part of the material uploaded about Ruben Aguirre, his movies, his performances in sketches and more, is blocked in certain countries due to copyright issues because of heirs who don't allow it to be distributed and so on. During the year 2007, Ruben Aguirre and his wife Consuelo Reyes were traveling in their private vehicle towards Los Mochis, Sinaloa. The actor knew the route very well since he used to take that highway regularly for work reasons. At one point during the trip, he came across one of the many toll booths along the way. Without thinking too much, he stopped accelerating and decided to get behind a Unidos de Sinaloa bus. The problem was that when he pressed the brake pedal, it didn't work. He tried to use it several times in vain. At the last second, he tried to swerve around the bus and ended up crashing straight into the toll booth's retaining wall. Consuelo Reyes' screams were heard amid the intense crash. They were heart-wrenching screams, and it was no wonder. After the accident, the authorities arrived and the couple received emergency care. In a complicated surgery, he ended up having 4 screws and a plate placed in his spine. His wife had to have one of her legs amputated. The good news was that their lives had been saved. The bad news was that from that moment on, Ruben Aguirre's life would go downhill. Ruben Aguirre Fuentes was born on June 15, 1934 in the Santa Anita neighborhood, located in Saltillo, Coahuila, in the colorful country of Mexico. He was the son of Ruben Aguirre Flores and Maria Victoria Fuentes de Aguirre, and from a very young age he was a restless child. While he was attending his early studies, he showed a talent for dressing up and imitating anyone who crossed his path. Art was in his blood from the very beginning. After finishing his secondary studies, he entered the prestigious Hermanos Escobar Higher School of Agriculture in Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua. After obtaining his degree as an agricultural engineer, he began to stand out in the field. During that time, his growth was not only professional. Ruben Aguirre became an extraordinarily tall individual, more precisely 1.96 m. Although he worked in the agricultural field, he confessed to having different goals for his future. He was not satisfied with his job since his dreams were in acting. He had already made the decision, he just lacked the resources. To get them, he started making small radio appearances, although the earnings at the stations were scarce. There he was able to feed his acting fantasy a little. Ruben was also passionate about bullfighting, to the point that he ended up venturing into the world of bullfights as a novice bullfighter. It was precisely because of his love for that profession that he met the woman who would become the love of his life. While he was showing his talent in the arena, his eyes met a girl who was watching him from the stands. That young woman was Consuelo de los Reyes. After this instant crush, in 1960 they made it official, and since then they were never apart again. They had 7 children, 4 daughters and 3 sons, who over time would make Ruben a grandfather to 16 grandchildren. In his autobiography, After You, he admitted that he had really enjoyed that time as a bullfighter and had even considered dedicating himself to it full-time. However, his height played a trick on him. His length gave him some advantages, but it also took away his agility. When he left bullfighting, he definitely did so with doubts. Above all, he feared being forgotten, which was far from what was going to happen. Ruben's desire to act became evident when he started working at Televisa. There, he worked as a high-ranking executive in charge of discovering new talent. And do you know who he found in his search? None other than Roberto Gómez Bolaños. Yes, exactly. Ruben Aguirre was the one who persuaded the channel authorities to give this new comedian a chance. In this way, it could be said that Chespirito's rise in the network was thanks to the professor's support. Over time, Chespirito returned the favor. When Aguirre asked him to join the cast of comedians in his productions, Bolaños gladly accepted. That's how the future professor started with the Chespirotadas. The problem was that the general management of Televisa gave him an ultimatum, since he couldn't be both behind and in front of the cameras. As the months went by, he was able to prove that he hadn't been wrong. After his start in Chespirito, another segment called The Super Geniuses of the Square Table came up, a parody of round table shows. This sketch was part of the show Saturday of Fortune, which aired in Mexico in the late 1960s. The well-remembered actor played an intellectual who would get easily annoyed during the discussions that took place at the square table and who tended toward the absurd. The curious thing was that thanks to the impact of this 5-minute segment, the sketch ended up becoming independent within the channel. The first appearance of Professor Girafales in El Chavo del Ocho was in the episode Don Ramon the Painter during the 1973 season. Do you remember it? Do you know what happens in that episode? Until that moment, the character of the professor had only been mentioned in passing in the series, but with his appearance he showed that he was here to stay. Do you remember the phrase "ta-ta-ta"? Well, the actor confessed that the phrase was said by one of his teachers at school, but that he did it in a slower and more melodic way. That's how, digging through his childhood memories, he decided to adopt it, but saying it with more strength and energy. Professor Girafales, besides wanting to win over Mrs. Florinda, he had to teach a group of boys and girls at school who sometimes drove him crazy, but that wasn't the only character he played. Within the vast universe of Chespirito Aguirre, he also brought other memorable characters to life. He portrayed Rufino Rufián, the nemesis of Chapo in Colorado, and Lucas Tañeira, the loyal companion of Chaparron Bonaparte in Los Chifladitos. He also played the role of Sergeant Refugio Paz Guato, who, whenever he had the chance, would find a way to make life difficult for El Chompiras. Although he tried to make his way in other television shows and in movies, he was not able to stand out. Professor Girafales seemed to be his trademark both positively and negatively because he was typecast in that role. That typecasting lasted for many years and forced him to travel around the country to earn his daily bread. And that's how our story goes back to the beginning. On Sunday, December 31st, 2007, around noon, Ruben Aguirre and his wife were approaching the toll booth in Mazatlan, Sinaloa in a pickup truck. According to the comedian's own statements, the vehicle lost its brakes, and to avoid crashing directly into a bus, he collided with a concrete pillar at the toll booth. This impact left an indelible mark on the lives of Aguirre and his wife. Although the first reports claimed that everything was fine, the reality was different. His wife had lost a leg and he suffered severe injuries. After that, Aguirre didn't have many options to keep working and followed the example of his colleagues from El Chavo del Ocho. That's how Professor Girafales' circus was born. At first, everything went smoothly, but then not only the idea but also the resources started to run out. By the year 2010, at 76 years old, Ruben Aguirre declared bankruptcy. Shortly after that sad news, he confessed to the media that all those hard times were due to the aftermath of the accident. Apparently, both his health and his wife's ended up exhausting all their savings. After several years of struggling with work and money, he had to face one more battle, or rather his final battle. On May 14, 2016, Ruben Aguirre was hospitalized due to pneumonia. Although the situation was under control, it was considered risky for his health and he remained hospitalized for more than 10 days. The later decision to send him home was made to prevent him from being exposed in the hospital, where the risk of catching a hospital-acquired virus could worsen his condition. That's how 25 de Mayo was discharged. Aguirre was very sick, and in recent weeks it was said that he couldn't move because of diabetes. Despite his fragile health, Aguirre managed to gather all his family to celebrate his 82nd birthday on June 15, 2016. Beyond his problems, he managed to celebrate in peace with his loved ones. Aware that his days were numbered, he made the most of this gathering to surround himself with the people he loved the most. 2 days later, in the early morning of June 17th, his pneumonia worsened and ended the life of Ruben Aguirre, who could not hold on any longer and passed away at his home in Puerto Vallarta, Jalisco. Because of his passing, his daughter released a statement. He lived very happily here in his last years. He died at peace with all of us. The family requested a private ceremony to say goodbye to him, and that was granted. Ruben Aguirre was laid to rest on the same Friday at a funeral home located in downtown Puerto Vallarta. During his burial, his followers were deeply moved by his passing, trying to make the farewell as pleasant as possible. Even though the show was already 50 years old, hundreds of children came to say goodbye one last time to their beloved teacher. Several mariachis sang El Chavo's song and the young fans left apples on his coffin. remembering the classes where the children from the neighborhood would honor their beloved teacher. The famous actor and comedian was bid farewell by a group of children, grandchildren, friends, and hundreds of people. Florinda Mesa, Carlos Villagrán, María Antonieta de las Nieves, and Edgar Vivar expressed their sorrow over the great loss, although they could not attend the wake due to distance and prior commitments. One of the first to react to the news was Edgar Vivar, who played Mr. Barriga and his son, Ñoño. My favorite teacher rests in peace. Today, my great friend Ruben Aguirre leaves this world. I will miss you a lot. Aguirre and Vivar were great friends. Even Professor Girafales' daughters called him Uncle Edgar. On the other hand, the son of his fictional platonic love, Carlos Villagrán, who played Kiko, shared in an interview with Televisa, "We are all sad for our dear teacher. Little by little, our neighborhood is going to heaven." He remembered the days of filming as moments of celebration and fun. The next day, a mass was held in memory of the actor at the Temple of the Aurora, and later his remains were cremated. The actress Florinda Mesa was not present at the final farewell, which was not surprising since she had also been absent at Don Ramon's farewell. Apparently, all the cups of coffee were not enough to make her fall in love. However, they had created a couple that would become more than iconic. Although Girafales never made things official with Doña Florinda, their love story did transcend and became emblematic. The explanation for the phenomenon came from Rubén Aguirre himself before his passing. If we had ever kissed, that continuity of love, of chasiness, would no longer have existed. All of that would have been broken. Chasiness that had the color and aroma of roses. Aguirre always brought a bouquet to try to win over Kiko's mom, and apparently he must have spent a considerable amount of money. But do you know how much it was in total? Well, there were fans who did the math and came up with a certain number. To calculate the amount, they took into account all the episodes of El Chavo del Ocho, which had a total of 290 episodes. It's estimated that the love-struck man visited Doña Florinda's house about 100 times at least. Taking this into account, Professor Girafales would have spent about 9,900 Mexican pesos, around $500, in his attempt to win over Doña Florinda. A lot or a little? The truth is that love can't be measured, but you can measure what you give up for your loved ones. There is no exact record of Rubén Aguirre's assets. What is known, as we already mentioned, is that he was financially broke and also had a debt with National Association of Actors, the National Association of Actors, until his last moment. It follows that he couldn't leave much to his large family except for a humble gift, his legacy. In his later years, he acknowledged that Professor Girafales was his most endearing and beloved character. Perhaps because he embodied the romantic and corny side that he himself carried within, but above all because he gave him international recognition. Rubén Aguirre stood out not only for his artistic talent but also for his deep sensitivity. In various interviews, he is seen as emotional, on the verge of tears. That was always the purpose of his existence, to be remembered as a good person. While it's clear from his appearance that he was a big man, it's just as clear from his story that he was also a great man. That's it for today's video. I hope you found the life of Rubén Aguirre, Professor Girafales, interesting. Several of you had asked me to cover more characters from the Chavo neighborhood. And I also invite you to leave suggestions to let me know which other comedians or actors, whether they're from El Chavo or from somewhere else, you want us to cover here on this channel. And with nothing more to say, I'm going to say goodbye. I invite you to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, but do it without making too much noise. And I'll warn you about one thing. The next person who interrupts a video will lose their recess. See you!